As the second component of our Campus Arts and Lecture series, I've invited 3 faculty from across campus to participate in a discussion about arts and education, and particularly about how in their own respective disciplines they encourage their students to take risks. But before we get into the conversation about that, I'd like to do some brief introductions here. Starting here immediately on my right is Professor Bill Peters of the Theater Arts Department, director, actor, who just closed a terrific production with many San Francisco State Theater Arts alumni over in Potrero Hill at Thick Description of The Tempest, in which he played a very compelling Prospero. Bill is a native of Canada and started his career as an assistant to the artistic director at the Stratford Shakespeare Festival, and founding member of a political satire group, Coast Productions. He received his MFA from the Yale School of Drama, and his extensive directing credits include projects at the Manhattan Theater Club, the Denver Center, Indiana Rep, and the Magic Theater in San Francisco. Bill's recent productions include an all-woman production of Hamlet here for the Theater Arts Department, and last fall, the Bruce Norris play, The Unmentionables. I'm very pleased to have him here today. Thank you, Bill. To his right is from the College of Ethnic Studies and the Department of American Indian Studies is John Carlos Perea. John Carlos is an assistant professor in the Department of American Indian Studies, and his research interests include the politics of noise and sound studies, urban American Indian live experiences and cultural productions, music technologies, recording and archiving practices, Native and African American jazz cultures, and the Creek and cow saxophonist Jim Pepper. John Carlos' first textbook, Intertribal Native American Music in the United States, was released by Oxford University Press in 2013, and his essays have been published in Music Cultures, as well as the Encyclopedia Britannica and Grove Dictionary of American Music. Welcome. And last but not least, Victor De La Rosa, textile artist in the Department of Art, works across a variety of media, both real and virtual, fiber, film, and digital, and is the lead artist in Galleria's current exhibit, Mi Barrio, forgive my Spanish here, Mi Barrio e Tu Barrio. How's that? Es tu Barrio. Good. Thank you. Victor uses United States Census Bureau information to examine the changing demographics of the mission through the medium of textiles. As the Latino population of the mission morphs, the entire city of San Francisco experiences continued change. The ideas of heritage, place, and belongings are continually shifted and blurred. Thank you for being here, all of you. And it's nice to have such a broad spectrum of artists and disciplines represented here. And I'd just like to open it up and jump in as you will, and talk about how you and each of your various disciplines encourage students to kind of move out of their comfort zone and take the proverbial risk in what they do, and how you nurture that. Why don't we start with you, Bill?
Well, I looked up risk in the dictionary.
Did you get board games?
Yeah, and it has 2 very interesting energies to it. The first one was a noun, and it says exposure to the possibility of loss or injury, a hazardous journey, a venture, which is about the only positive word in the whole list here, a person or a thing regarded as a source of danger. Now, if I were to pick any one of those and dangle it in front of a student, I think that last one would probably be the one that would most catch their attention, is them being a source of danger in what it was that they were setting out to engage in creatively. The other side of the definition is to endanger, to act so as to bring about the possibility of an unpleasant or unwelcome event. to venture into a place or a situation, to be bold or daring. All of those sound really great. You know, I think our students, I think in general, coming into the university, and in some ways, and I think many of us probably share feeling in this direction, that there's something already guarded about them. There's something already ready to excel in terms of jumping through expected hoops, of performing up to some sort of standard that's been set for them, achieving high marks, grades, that sort of thing. And Picasso famously said that it takes a long time to become young. His whole career was pretty well dedicated to those last few moments of his life where he could actually defiantly still be, in his terms, a very naive and freshly blooming creative artist at the end of his life. And I think in many ways, you know, my job is to take the students and myself back to that earlier time when they truly were young in terms of what their imaginations could apply themselves to. Various techniques for that, we'll probably hit on some of them. But in a nutshell, that's probably what I would say I expect to be doing during the semester.
I could key off of that idea of students and their academic needs and their perceptions, and the other part, which is being an artist. So what I'd like to do in the very beginning is to, in the syllabus in the first day lecture, is to let them know that risk-taking, exploration, these are parts of the reward system of the class. And get this idea of them as students sort of tucked away, and then start treating them as artists. And as an artist, our foremost job in general terms is to create something that we've never seen before. So that encourages the student to really take risks, because it puts them in a very precarious situation right then, because they have to challenge all their preconceived notions of what they feel art is. And what I discover with our students is that they've already seen the outcome of art, the finished product, and they have not discovered the process. So we put that part of them as students away and empower them as artists, and then have them make that discovery in between a finished outcome, a piece of work, and everything that goes in between it. And as we all know, there's tenfold amounts of work between the finished product and where we've started with our concepts or ideas. And that is what I do to sort of embrace them and give them a parachute and say it's okay to take risks and failures, and that's necessary. And then they're able to then sort of go into the unknown and make something we've never seen before.
I saw an interview with the actor from the film Boys Don't Cry, who workshops, Hilary Swank, who workshopped a lot of that script at Sundance, and who said in this interview that there were about 100 different ways to do the final scene, and they found all 100 of the wrong ways to do it before they found the right one. So that failure, as we call it, is sometimes often has those negative connotations, but it's out of that we find the success. And that's what I find to be the challenge in getting the students to embrace. And John, I see you nodding a lot here, so I want to give you a chance to chime in.
I think in the particular case of the class that I teach in American Indian Studies, American Indian Music, that the interesting thing about that process of A, being an artist, and B, where you were just going in terms of learning how to deal with those failures is that and the cultural context perhaps for understanding those failures, that it's not simply failure in that you did something bad, but it's that a certain failure may carry with it a responsibility that you remember and then teach, right? My particular class, American Indian Music, focuses on the music of the intertribal powwow, or intertribal urban American Indian powwow. And in order to teach that, the way that I was taught on this campus when I was an undergraduate in the early 90s, I was taught by a lecturer in American Indian Studies named Barney Hoehner. And what he did was he brought in a powwow drum and he sat everybody around it and he taught you how to sing. And so my class requires no musical experience, but when you come in, whether you knew it or not, by the end of the class, you're going to learn how to sing 10 to 15 Northern Plains powwow songs. You're going to learn to sing 10 to 15 Northern Plains powwow songs whether you identify as American Indian or not. Because Dr. Hoehner's 3 rules for learning how to sing were that you could sing, that you could get along around the drum, and that you were Indian, right? Meaning that Indianness to him was important, right? He wanted to be able to have the drum be a space for Native students on campus, but what was more important to him, as I remember it, right, is that through the act of sitting down around that drum, through the act of sitting and learning how to, through the act of sitting down and learning how to sing, right? Learning how to sing these songs and learning how to take responsibility for what those sounds mean, right? For people who come in as artists, Native or not, that gives them a certain set of experiences that they then have to deal with. For people who don't identify as being artists or who don't identify with being Native, they also get a certain amount out of it, right? So I think in the particular case of what my class does on campus, it's the unexpectedness, right? It's having to do with, okay, well, what are you going to do now, right? Not to put people necessarily in a pressure situation where they don't want to come, but to say, okay, let's do this, right? Let's engage that performativity in a way that perhaps you weren't expecting. So that then if a mistake is made around the drum or something like that, it's not that you did it wrong, it's that here's the story that tells you why you shouldn't do it like that again, right? So that the cultural context of a mistake can be understood, right? And so it's not only a different artistic experience, it's sort of a different cultural experience at the same time, different context.
I have a quote about making mistakes too. French pianist called Hélène Grimaud. Anybody know Hélène Grimaud's work? She said that a note that is played wrong with élan is heard differently than one that is just played wrong. You know? That you hear the force of the reach, the openness of the quest in that wrong note that's played with that spirit of jumping off a cliff, running off an edge. You're not expecting a net to be there. And that, again, we can put these quests with our students into language that excites them. It just excites them about being wrong. I remember when I was first starting to study the arts, I was lucky to have teachers that would just come in and not be afraid of making fools of themselves.
So much of what we're talking about here is about teaching creativity. How do you teach creativity, and how much in what we do as artists and by extension as our role as teachers are we holding the mirror up to our students and asking them to reflect on the story that they're trying to tell the world? How much of that is part of your process?
Well, I think we're all talking about the idea of mastery. And we all teach mastery in all of our own fields. That wrong note can only be recovered by somebody who's had experience to know what to do next. That's sort of the difference between sort of making a fool of yourself and being an informed and intentional explorer. So I think we're all teaching mastery in all of our own fields, and that is something that the students don't know. I encounter so many students who've never made anything in their lives. They've in a consumer culture, and they have never made something for their with their own hands, and that discovery is so powerful. But if you just build on these steps, whether it is a math problem or whether how to construct a poem or how to construct cloth or a song, they build on, they get that discovery and then they build on it. How do we hold up the mirror? I think we're all here because we take risks in our own careers. And the students see that we sort of walk the talk.
I don't know if I necessarily want to teach someone how to be creative as much as I want to put a set of choices in front of them. And the rewarding part for me is that they pick one, right? I tell a lot of my students, you know, that there's a perception of you all that none of you shouldn't be here. You're revolutionary for even sitting in the classroom and and then on top of that, coming and taking a creative arts / ethnic studies / music class, right? So in that particular realm, right, being that you didn't expect what you were going to get when you came here in the first place, I'm going to put this range of choices out right in front of you. What I want to see you do is pick one and tell me why that's relevant to you culturally. For the non-native student who comes to class and goes saying, you know, I may never do anything with this again, but now at least I know I understand when I hear that drum, it's not noise, right? That is important to me as a native student who comes and says, I want to go back home and learn my language because of what you taught to me. Right? So it's that range of choices. It's that range of not necessarily teaching you the right way to do it, but giving you a range of different right ways and then seeing you run with it in a way that is meaningful, not just to you, but hopefully meaningful to the continued maintenance of these kind of activities on campus.
The students are already creative. You don't create, you just discover and unearth their creativity. No one has taught them that process, those steps. And I think that we're talking also about defending your work, which is something you're going to have to do in any field. So the things you learn in my class, you can apply to any job you're going to get. In fact, you're going to be better at your job after my class because you're going to find lots of plan B moments and lots of ways to creatively express a single idea, and not just one way. So when I talk about mastery, it's about using everything that's gone before you. I use Malcolm Gladwell's Outlier as a way of introducing mastery to the students, and the idea that we see Bill Gates or the Beatles or Steve Jobs and we just think that they are naturally talented and gifted, but really what they have is thousands of hours of practice until we actually see what they've done. And that excites the students. That makes it a different kind of challenge. The students don't want an easy answer. They don't want an easy way, but they love it when they get the steps and the tools to unearth their creativity.
John, I see that you brought a drum. Could you please
You might want to turn this.
give us a bit of a taste of what it is?
A research project for which I received the Presidential Award for Probationary Faculty under President Corrigan was to archive Dr. Hoehner's songs. The reason that's interesting is because none of his songs have been written down. And so we're actually sort of taking a reverse approach to archiving, whereas most of the time you think of the Library of Congress and going back to recordings, and we're making the recordings now from two people, myself and Dirk Alphen, a local community member, who remember most of them. And so this is one of the songs that a student who comes to American Indian Studies 320 might learn during the course of the semester. I don't want to blow anybody. imagine a much larger drum set out on the floor and myself and 7 or 8 other students singing in unison around it. That's basically what happens during the class. And again, those students, some are native, some are non-native, some have musical experience, some don't have musical experience. They're taught those songs over the course of the semester. It's interesting on the subject of risk. One of the risks that students found out about a couple semesters ago was we started getting noise complaints on campus. And we started being surveilled by the university police during the Occupy. And at one point, we didn't have a room to sing in on campus. And a couple of students came to me and said, we're paying for this. Why is this happening to us? What is it with those sounds that make people so nervous? And I would be the first to say that I understand why somebody, that's why I stood up, right? I mean, I would be the first to say that I understand that this is a different aesthetic, sort of quality. But at the same time, right, that some of the responses put students in that position to understand that these sounds mean something now, but that's part of a historical continuum. These songs between 1890 and 1934 were outlawed by the United States government under pain of military reprisal, right? And so there's interesting continuums on that subject of risk as you started out mentioning it, right? Where students not only come into contact with it in their own lives, right? How they choose to deal with it in their own art, right? But also understanding that there's a continuum there. So there's sort of present responsibilities, past responsibilities, and then this interesting idea of future responsibilities. Where will they take it, right? Where will they take it in their own creativity, which is kind of the most exciting part. I get to sort of help them through that past and present part, and then they take that future aspect, which is, for me, the most exciting part.
I think we have time for just a couple questions.
What the gist of the words of that?
I'm sorry. It's sung in the Lakota language. It's a grand entry song. It would be sung at the beginning of the powwow. And it says, over here, there's a good time. The dancing people say this as they come into the arena. So students get the Lakota lyrics, the English translation, and they learn how to deal with both during the course of the class.
Just one other tiny comment. I read something that from Pablo Salsa in his 90s. Someone said to him, why are you still playing music? He said, because I stole my learns.
Yeah. Anyone else?
Has anyone ever taken what they get out of your class and then kind of translated into their own some other cultural situation? Could you give us an example?
I have had students who have come to my class not knowing anything about necessarily where they're from, and taking the impetus to say, well, I got to learn this music, now I want to go find out what my own music is just generally, right? One of the things, one of the sort of realms that's been the most interesting in is a lot of African-American folks coming to class because they're finding out that they have American Indian in their family. They start with my class, and then whenever anybody comes like that, we try to encourage them, okay, so if you're from here, you can come learn how to do this because it's intertribal. Right? But we also want you to be able to go, how can we help you find where you're from as well? So we try to do both. So yes, there are a lot of examples of that.
Anybody apply it to like urban, something maybe non-Native American, but urban?
I had a student, well, I don't know if it's urban or not, but I had a zoology student who came to take the class. She was very upfront with me. She said, I'm here for the credits, and she ended up doing her paper on one of the roots that we use for singing. We chew a particular root. And she ended up doing a paper on that, right? And she tied it all into how this related not only in a scientific context, but in a cultural context. So I guess that would be the closest outside of a native context that comes to mind off the top of my head.
Well, and with that, I think we're out of time. Gentlemen, thank you. Thank you all for being here.